Billionaire goes to Paris for a business deal. But a business trip turned to a steamy honeymoon. He put my name in lights on the Eiffel Tower and asked me to marry him in front of thousands of strangers. But 3 weeks earlier, I'd almost left Paris without saying goodbye because I thought he was just another workaholic who'd never choose me. How did a business trip turn into the greatest love story of my life? It started with a spilled coffee at 30,000 feet. Welcome back to CJ Stories, where we bring you emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul. If you're just joining us for the first time, you're welcome to this wonderful big family. We're so glad to have you here. Please make sure to watch till the end, and if today's story moves you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with your family and loved ones. Now, let's dive into today's story. June 3, 2024. Kenneth B. Lee, 37 and exhausted, didn't even look up when someone took the seat beside him in first class. He'd built a tech empire from nothing. Turned lines of code into a billion-dollar company that revolutionized cloud security. Made more money than his younger self ever dreamed possible. But sitting in seat 2A on a flight to Paris, staring at a contract that could expand his company into the European market, all he felt was empty. 5 years since the divorce. 5 years since Amanda walked away because she couldn't compete with his company for his attention. She'd been right, of course. He'd chosen work over everything. Over her. Over the possibility of a family. Over any kind of life that didn't involve quarterly earnings and board meetings. Now, at 37, born in 1987 to parents who'd built their own modest fortune and lost it, Kenneth had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. Champagne before takeoff? He glanced at the flight attendant, ready to decline. That's when he saw her. The woman in 2B had her laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard, completely focused. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. Deep brown skin that seemed to glow in the cabin lighting. Natural curls pulled back in a low bun that somehow looked both professional and effortless. High cheekbones. Full lips pressed together in concentration. And she was completely unaware he existed. Kenneth couldn't remember the last time a woman hadn't noticed him. Not in an arrogant way, just the reality of being a billionaire under 40. Women noticed. They always noticed. This one didn't even glance up. Sir? Champagne? Yes. Thank you. He accepted the glass, his gaze drifting back to his neighbor. She wore a navy blazer over a cream blouse. Simple gold hoops in her ears. No wedding ring, he'd already checked, and that made him pause. When had he become the kind of man who checked for rings? Her fingers stopped moving. She sat back, read something on her screen, and he heard the softest sigh. Not frustration. Sadness. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. Bad news? She turned to him, and he forgot how to breathe. Up close, she was devastating. Not just beautiful, there was intelligence in those dark brown eyes, depth that suggested she'd lived and learned and survived. Probably early 30s, if he had to guess. Young enough to still have hope. Old enough to know better. I'm sorry? Her voice was warm, professional. You sighed. Just wondered if everything was okay. For a moment, he thought she'd shut him down. Give him the polite brush-off that travelers perfected. Instead, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, and she gave him a small smile. Just work stuff. Nothing dramatic. She glanced at his own open laptop. Looks like we're both working our way across the Atlantic. Paris business trip, he said, then felt like an idiot stating the obvious. Same. She extended her hand. Julia Garrett. Her handshake was firm, confident. Her hand was warm and soft and fit perfectly in his, and Kenneth held on a fraction too long before releasing it. Kenneth Lee. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, quickly masked. The Kenneth Lee? KL Tech Security? Here it comes, he thought. The calculation. The sudden interest that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with his bank account. But Julia just nodded once and turned back to her laptop. Impressive company. Your encryption protocols are some of the best in the industry. That was it. No batting eyelashes. No sudden need for his phone number. Just a professional acknowledgement before she returned to her work. Kenneth stared at her profile, completely thrown. You're in tech, he asked. Legal consultant. Specialize in international contract law and business acquisitions. She didn't look up from her screen. I have a client acquiring a boutique hotel chain in Paris. Due diligence never sleeps. I'm closing a deal with a European data consortium. Due diligence is definitely awake and demanding. That earned him a real smile. Brief, but genuine. The joys of business travel. The flight attendant made announcements. Passengers settled. The plane began to taxi, and Julia closed her laptop, tucking it away with practiced efficiency. Kenneth should have done the same. Should have prepared for the meeting that could change everything for his company. Instead, he watched Julia pull out a worn paperback, actual paper, not a device, and he found himself wondering what kind of woman read physical books on international flights in 2024. "What are you reading?" She showed him the cover. "Beloved. Toni Morrison. I reread it every few years. Heavy reading for a flight. Heavy reading for life," she said quietly. "But necessary. Reminds me where I come from. What matters." And just like that, Kenneth B. Lee, billionaire who'd stopped believing in anything beyond profit margins and stock prices, felt something shift in his chest. The plane lifted off. Paris waited. A business deal that should have been his only focus suddenly felt like the least interesting thing about this trip. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old and completely unimpressed by his money, had just made a 6-hour flight feel like it might not be long enough. What Kenneth didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Julia had recognized his name for a different reason. 3 years ago, in 2021, when she'd left her corporate law firm after her father's death devastated her in 2018 and made her rethink everything, she'd turned down a job offer from KL Tech. She'd turned down Kenneth Lee. And now she was sitting next to the man whose company she'd walked away from, pretending she didn't remember every detail of that job offer. Pretending her heart wasn't racing. Pretending this was just another business trip. It wasn't. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, 30,000 feet above reality, Julia E. Garrett made a critical mistake. She started talking to him. It began innocently. Kenneth asked about her book. She gave a short answer. He asked a follow-up question that showed he'd actually listened. She elaborated. Before she knew it, they were deep in a conversation about literature, memory, and the weight of history. "My father," Julia heard herself say, and immediately wanted to take it back. She didn't talk about Dad. Not with strangers. Not on airplanes. Not with billionaire tech CEOs who probably wouldn't understand what it meant to lose the person who believed in you most. But Kenneth's blue-gray eyes held genuine interest, not polite obligation. "What about him?" "He died 6 years ago. 2018, I was 28. Julia kept her voice steady, the way she'd learned. "He was the one who got me into reading. Said books were proof that human beings could still create something beautiful, even after everything." "Everything?" "He grew up in Alabama in the 60s. Saw things. Survived things." She traced the edge of her book. "He never talked much about the worst of it, but he read constantly. Morrison, Baldwin, Ellison. Said they turned pain into truth." Kenneth was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of someone who didn't know what to say. The thoughtful silence of someone actually processing. "I'm sorry you lost him," he finally said. "Sounds like he was remarkable." "He was." Julia managed to smile. "He was also stubborn, opinionated, and once got banned from a city council meeting for being too honest about zoning corruption." Kenneth laughed. Actually laughed, warm and surprised. "I would have liked him. He would have grilled you about data privacy and government surveillance. Even better." Julia found herself studying him. Really looking at him for the first time since she'd recognized his name. Kenneth B. Lee didn't look like the photos from tech magazines. Those showed a man in expensive suits, polished and distant. The man beside her had loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves. Dark hair slightly messed from running his fingers through it. Strong jawline shadowed with stubble. Tired eyes that suggested too many late nights. He looked human. Real. Dangerous. "What about you?" she asked, partly to stop her own thoughts. "What brings a tech billionaire to Paris? Besides the obvious business deal. How do you know I'm a billionaire?" "Your company went public in 2021. Stock prices are public record. Math isn't that hard." He smiled. "Fair enough. And to answer your question, just the deal. Expanding into European markets. Building partnerships. The usual corporate empire stuff." But something in his voice suggested it wasn't usual at all. Julia had spent enough years reading witnesses and opponents in legal proceedings to hear what people didn't say. "You don't sound excited about it." Kenneth shifted in his seat, surprised. "It's a good deal. Smart business." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a long moment. "No, it's not." The flight attendants came through with dinner service. Julia ordered the chicken. Kenneth ordered the fish. They ate in companionable silence, and Julia wondered when silence with a stranger had stopped feeling awkward and started feeling comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Kenneth said eventually. "And you can absolutely tell me it's none of my business." "Okay. Why'd you leave corporate law?" Julia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "How did you know I left corporate law?" "You said, legal consultant. Consultants are usually refugees from bigger firms." "Smart." She should have expected that from someone who built a billion-dollar company by 29. I left in 2021, she said carefully. 3 years ago. I was 31 and drowning in work I didn't care about for clients I didn't believe in. My mom was alone after Dad died. I was making a lot of money and feeling completely empty. She set down her fork. So I started my own consulting firm. Smaller clients. Cases I actually care about. Less money, more sleep, better life. Sounds like you have it figured out. I have it more figured out than I did at 28, working 90-hour weeks and forgetting to eat. Julia met his gaze. What about you? Do you have it figured out? Kenneth's laugh was bitter. Not even close. Want to talk about it? She didn't know why she asked. This wasn't her business. He was a stranger on a plane. In 6 hours, they'd land in Paris, go their separate ways, and never see each other again. Except Kenneth Lee started talking. I got divorced 5 years ago. 2019, I was 32. He stared at his water glass like it held answers. Amanda, my ex-wife, she was right to leave. I was married to my company, not to her. She wanted kids, a family, a husband who came home. I wanted to build something that mattered. Something that would last. Did you build something? Yeah. KL Tech is everything I wanted it to be. He paused. But I'm 37 now, born in 1987 to parents who always said family comes first, and I'm sitting on a plane alone, flying to a city I've never seen, for a deal that will make me richer and won't make me happier. So you tell me if I've figured it out. Julia's heart did something complicated in her chest. This honesty, this vulnerability from a man who had every reason to pretend his life was perfect, it was unexpected. Real. Maybe figuring it out is overrated, she said softly. Maybe just being honest about not having it figured out is enough. Kenneth turned to look at her fully. The cabin lights had dimmed for the overnight flight. Paris was still hours away. Around them, passengers slept or watched movies or pretended the world wasn't rushing past at 500 miles per hour. And Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old and careful about men ever since her last relationship ended badly in 2022, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Julia, Kenneth said, and her name in his voice sounded like a question. When we land in Paris. Don't. She said it gently but firmly. We both have work. Important work. Let's not complicate it. She watched disappointment cross his face, quickly hidden. You're right. Of course. He nodded. Professional boundaries. Professional boundaries, she echoed. But when the flight attendants came through to collect dinner trays and Kenneth's hand brushed hers accidentally, the electricity that sparked between them had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with the fact that Paris was waiting. And despite every logical reason to keep her distance, Julia was starting to think 6 hours might be both too long and not nearly long enough. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. June 4, 2024. Charles de Gaulle Airport at dawn. Julia stepped off the plane into the organized chaos of international arrivals and immediately lost sight of Kenneth in the crowd. Which was fine. Perfect, actually. They'd said goodbye at baggage claim, polite, professional, a handshake that lasted 1 second too long before he headed toward the taxi queue and she toward the car service her client had arranged. That should have been the end of it. Julia collected her luggage, found her driver, and tried to ignore the strange hollowness in her chest. She'd had a nice conversation with an interesting man on a plane. That was all. People did it all the time. It didn't mean anything. The drive into Paris should have taken her breath away, her first time in the city, early morning light turning everything golden, but she kept replaying the moment Kenneth had asked, when we land in Paris, and she'd cut him off. Smart move. Professional move. So why did it feel like a mistake? Her phone buzzed. Sienna, her best friend back home in Atlanta, born in 1989 and perpetually optimistic about Julia's love life despite Julia's protests. Sienna, did you land? Is Paris gorgeous? Have you met a handsome Frenchman yet? Julia smiled despite herself. Julia, landed safely. Paris is beautiful. No Frenchman. Just work. She didn't mention Kenneth. Sienna would read too much into it. The car pulled up to a boutique hotel in the Marais district, not where she was staying, but where her client, the American entrepreneur buying the hotel chain, had asked to meet for breakfast. Julia checked her reflection in the car window. The flight had been long, but she'd changed in the airport bathroom, freshened up. Navy dress, professional but not severe. Gold earrings. Hair in a neat bun. She looked capable, pulled together. She didn't look like a woman who'd spent a transatlantic flight talking to a billionaire and wondering what if. The hotel lobby was all original stonework and modern elegance. Fresh flowers. Morning light through tall windows. Julia was reaching for her phone to call her client when she heard a voice behind her. Julia? She knew that voice. Had listened to it for 6 hours at 30,000 feet. Julia turned slowly. Kenneth B. Lee stood in the hotel lobby, looking as shocked as she felt. He'd changed too, dark jeans, white button-down, blazer. Casual but expensive. His hair was still damp like he'd just showered. He looked unfairly good for someone who'd just crossed an ocean. Kenneth. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. What are you doing here? Meeting. He gestured vaguely toward the hotel restaurant. My Paris contact wanted to have breakfast here. Said it was his favorite spot. You. Client meeting. Same place, apparently. They stared at each other. The universe was either laughing at them or trying to tell them something. This is? Kenneth started. Coincidence, Julia finished firmly. Just coincidence. Right. Coincidence. But he was smiling. And she was smiling. And professional boundaries were getting harder to remember. Ms. Garrett? A young woman approached, tablet in hand. Your client is running late. He asked if you could wait in the courtyard. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Of course. Thank you. Mr. Lee? Another assistant appeared. Your breakfast meeting has been delayed an hour. Traffic from the airport. Kenneth's smile widened. Looks like we both have time to kill. Julia knew she should make an excuse. Find somewhere else to wait. Maintain distance. Instead, she heard herself say, there's a cafe across the street. I could use actual French coffee after that flight. Best idea I've heard all morning. 5 minutes later, they sat at a tiny table outside a corner cafe, espresso for her, café crème for him, and Paris waking up around them. Okay, Julia said, wrapping her hands around the small cup. This is surreal. Which part? The coffee, the city, or running into each other 4,000 miles from where we met? All of it. She took a sip. Perfect. Rich and strong and exactly what she needed. I've never been to Paris. Never been to Europe at all, actually. Kenneth looked surprised. Never. Corporate law doesn't leave much room for vacation. And after I started my own firm, I was building a client base. Money was tight. She shrugged. This is my first international business trip. My client is paying, so here I am. Then we should make sure you actually see the city, Kenneth said. Not just hotel conference rooms. I'm here to work. So am I. But we have to eat. We have to sleep. Might as well see some things in between. Julia studied him. Kenneth. We talked about this. We talked about not complicating our work. I'm not suggesting we complicate anything. He leaned forward. I'm suggesting that two people who happen to be in Paris at the same time might enjoy seeing it together. As friends. Colleagues. Fellow business travelers who get along. Fellow business travelers. Exactly. It was a terrible idea. Julia knew it was a terrible idea. One meal, she said. That's all I'm agreeing to. One dinner, somewhere you pick, and then we focus on our actual jobs. Kenneth's grin was worth the risk. Deal. Her phone buzzed. Client arriving in 5 minutes. I have to go. Julia stood, and Kenneth stood with her. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the company. He hesitated. Julia. I'm really glad you sat next to me on that plane. Me too, she admitted. She walked back across the street, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. When she reached the hotel entrance and glanced back, he was still there, still watching. Still smiling. Julia E. Garrett, who'd spent the last 3 years building a life of careful choices and professional focus, had just agreed to dinner with a man who made her forget every reason she'd sworn off romance. Paris in June. Kenneth Lee. One dinner. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, her practical side whispered. Everything, her hopeful heart answered. But maybe in the best way. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. June 5, 2024. One day in Paris, and Julia was already in trouble. Her client meetings had gone well. The hotel acquisition was moving forward smoothly. She should have been focused on contract details, due diligence, legal protection clauses. Instead, she was standing in front of her hotel room mirror at 7 p.m., changing clothes for the 3rd time. It's just dinner, she told herself. Professional dinner between two business travelers. Except she'd spent 20 minutes on her hair, letting her natural curls fall loose around her shoulders instead of the usual professional bun. She'd traded her business attire for a wrap dress in deep burgundy that her best friend Sienna had insisted she pack, just in case. Strappy heels instead of sensible pumps. This was not professional dinner outfit behavior. Her phone rang. Mom calling from Atlanta. Hey, Ma. Julia answered, still staring at her reflection. Baby, you made it to Paris safely? Nadine Garrett's voice was warm, concerned. Her mom, 64 and still treating Julia like she was 16 instead of 34. Made it fine. The flight was good. You sound distracted. Everything okay with the contract work? Work's fine. Everything's fine. Julia Elizabeth Garrett, I've known you for 34 years. Something's going on. Julia sat on the edge of the hotel bed. I met someone. Silence. Then, in Paris? Baby, you've been there one day. I met him on the plane, actually. We sat next to each other. And then we ran into each other this morning at the same hotel, and now we're having dinner tonight, and Ma, I don't know what I'm doing. Is he nice? So far. Is he respectful? Very. Does he make you smile? Julia thought about Kenneth's laugh in the cafe that morning. The way he'd looked at her like she was the most interesting person in Paris. Yeah. He does. Then go to dinner, baby. See what happens. You've been alone since that disaster with Marcus. His name was Devon, Ma. Whatever his name was, he was 3 years ago and you've been locked up in work ever since. Your daddy would want you to be happy. Julia's throat tightened. I know. Be careful, but be open. Okay? Okay. Love you, Ma. Love you too. Julia hung up just as a text came through from Kenneth. Kenneth, lobby in 10 minutes? I promise you've never had French food like this. Julia, see you there. She grabbed her purse, took one last look in the mirror, and headed downstairs before she could change her mind again. Kenneth was waiting by the entrance, and the look on his face when he saw her made every minute of wardrobe indecision worth it. Wow! He stood up straighter. Julia, you look professional, she teased. Stunning. You look absolutely stunning. He dressed up too. Dark slacks, crisp white shirt open at the collar, navy blazer. His hair was styled but still had that slightly messy quality that made her want to run her fingers through it. Stop it, she told herself. Professional dinner. Colleagues. So where are we going? She asked as they stepped out into the warm June evening. A place in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Small, family-owned. My business partner Preston, you remember I mentioned him, he lived in Paris for a year back in 2015. Gave me a whole list of places tourists never find. They walked through narrow streets as the sun set, painting everything gold and rose. Paris was alive around them, couples strolling hand in hand, cafes filling with dinner crowds, street musicians playing on corners. Julia had traveled for work before. Depositions in other cities, client meetings in different states. But she'd never felt like this. Like the city itself was part of the magic. Or maybe that was just Kenneth beside her, pointing out architectural details and making her laugh with stories about his disastrous first attempt at speaking French earlier that day. The restaurant was exactly as promised, tiny, intimate, filled with locals and the smell of incredible food. The owner greeted them in rapid French, and Kenneth responded in what Julia assumed was supposed to be French but sounded more like English with an accent. The owner laughed, patted Kenneth's shoulder, and switched to perfect English. For you, my friend, a special table. He led them to a corner table by the window, overlooking a quiet street where ivy climbed ancient stone walls. This is perfect, Julia said softly. Wait until you taste the food. He was right. Dinner was extraordinary. They started with French onion soup that melted on Julia's tongue. Moved to cocoa vin that made her close her eyes in appreciation. Shared a bottle of wine that Kenneth said was from a vineyard in Burgundy. But better than the food was the conversation. Kenneth told her about building his company from nothing, working out of a cramped apartment in Seattle in 2016 when he was only 29. The terror and exhilaration of watching it grow. The loneliness of success. Julia told him about her father's death in 2018, how it had shattered her at 28 and made her question everything. The year she'd spent going through the motions before finally walking away from corporate law in 2021. Do you regret it? Kenneth asked. Leaving the big firm? Not even a little bit. I make less money, but I actually sleep at night. I take cases that matter. Help people who need it. She paused. What about you? Do you regret the divorce? Kenneth was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. I regret that I wasn't the husband she needed. But I don't regret that we're not together anymore. We wanted different things. She wanted a partner. I wanted to change the world. He looked up, met Julia's eyes. Turns out changing the world is lonely when you do it by yourself. So why are you still by yourself? The question came out before Julia could stop it. Too personal. Too direct. But Kenneth didn't look offended. Just thoughtful. Honestly? I haven't met anyone who made me want to try again. Who made me think maybe I could do both, build something meaningful and have someone to share it with. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Until now. Julia's breath caught. His hand was warm, strong. Their fingers intertwined like it was the most natural thing in the world. Kenneth, I leave Paris in 6 weeks. You leave when your deal closes. This isn't. I know. I know it's complicated. Bad timing. Probably a terrible idea. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending electricity up her arm. But Julia, I can't remember the last time I felt this alive. Like I actually want to be present instead of thinking 3 steps ahead to the next meeting, the next merger, the next thing I'm supposed to accomplish. What are you saying? I'm saying I have 5 more weeks in Paris. You have 6. And I don't want to spend them pretending I don't want to know everything about you. Julia should have pulled her hand away. Should have reminded him, reminded herself, that she'd built a careful life back in Atlanta. That she'd sworn off relationships after Devon broke her heart in 2022. That falling for a billionaire in Paris was a recipe for disaster. Instead, she squeezed his hand. One day at a time. That's all I can promise. Kenneth's smile lit up his whole face. One day at a time is perfect. They ordered dessert, creme brulee that they shared, feeding each other bites and laughing when Julia got sugar on her nose and Kenneth reached over to brush it away, his touch lingering. Walking back to her hotel later, Julia's hand found Kenneth's like they'd been holding hands for years instead of hours. Paris glittered around them, and for the first time since her father died 6 years ago, Julia felt something she'd almost forgotten. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. At her hotel entrance, Kenneth pulled her close. Not kissing, not yet. Just holding her, his forehead resting against hers. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow, she agreed. Julia E. Garrett went to sleep that night in Paris, 34 years old and falling for a man she'd known for 3 days. Somewhere in Atlanta, her mother Nadine smiled, hoping her daughter had finally found what she deserved. And in his own hotel across the city, Kenneth B. Lee lay awake, wondering how a business trip to Paris had become the best decision of his 37 years. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. June 8, 2024. 5 days in Paris, and they'd already established a rhythm. Kenneth woke each morning to a text from Julia, sometimes a photo of her breakfast croissant, sometimes a complaint about French coffee being too strong, once just a picture of the sunrise over the Seine with the words, "You should see this." He'd wished, desperately, that he was seeing it with her. Their work schedules were demanding. Kenneth spent long days in conference rooms negotiating data transfer protocols and privacy regulations with the European consortium. Julia was buried in contract law, working with French attorneys to navigate the complexities of international property acquisition. But every evening, they found each other. Dinner at hidden restaurants. Walks along the river. One night they stumbled into a jazz club in Montmartre and stayed until 2 in the morning, pressed close in the crowded space, swaying to music neither of them would remember but both would never forget. Tonight was different. Tonight was their first official date, at least, that's what Kenneth had called it when he texted her that afternoon. Kenneth said dinner reservations at 8. Where's something nice? I'm taking you somewhere special. Julia said this better not be some over-the-top billionaire nonsense. Kenneth said would I do that? Julia said I've known you for 5 days. I have no idea what you'd do. Kenneth said then I guess you'll find out. Now Kenneth stood outside Julia's hotel at 7:30, holding a single white rose and feeling like a teenager on prom night. At 37 years old, divorced, and supposedly worldly, he was nervous. Actually, genuinely nervous. When Julia emerged, he understood why. She wore a midnight blue dress that hugged every curve, her natural curls styled in soft waves around her face. Gold jewelry caught the light. Heels that made her legs look endless. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Hi, she said, a little breathless. Hi. He handed her the rose. If you say, professional, I'm going back inside. Kenneth laughed. I was going to say breathtaking. Pink colored her cheeks. Better answer. The car he'd hired was waiting. Julia raised an eyebrow when she saw it. You hired a car service? I hired a driver who knows Paris better than Google Maps. There's a difference. He opened the door for her. Trust me? She paused, then smiled. Yeah, I do. That simple statement hit him harder than it should have. Julia Garrett, smart and careful and carrying her own wounds, trusted him. Kenneth was determined not to mess that up. They drove through Paris as evening settled, the city lighting up like someone had scattered diamonds across stone and water. The driver, Pierre, who Kenneth had hired for the evening, pointed out landmarks and told stories in accented English. Julia pressed her face to the window like a kid, and Kenneth watched her instead of the scenery. Where are we going? She asked as they crossed the Seine. You'll see. 10 minutes later, they pulled up to a building that made Julia gasp. Kenneth. Is this the Eiffel Tower? And before you say it's too touristy, I don't care. You've never been to Paris. We're doing the touristy thing right. But he hadn't just brought her to see the Eiffel Tower. He'd reserved a table at Le Jules Verne, the Michelin-starred restaurant on the second floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Julia stared at him as they stepped out of the elevator into the elegant dining room. This is over-the-top billionaire nonsense. Absolutely it is. He took her hand. You deserve over-the-top. Dinner was exquisite, courses that were works of art, wine that cost more than Julia's first car, service that was somehow attentive without being intrusive. But the real magic was the conversation. Tell me something nobody knows about you, Kenneth said over the third course. Julia considered, twirling her wine glass. I can't cook. Like, at all. I once burned water. That's physically impossible. I found a way. Your turn. I play piano. Taught myself when I was 14. It's the only thing I do that isn't about building or achieving or making something profitable. Play for me sometime? Deal. Kenneth leaned forward. Another one. What's your biggest fear? Julia's smile faded slightly. Ending up alone. Building this whole life, this career, this independent woman thing, and then looking around one day and realizing I pushed everyone away in the process. Kenneth reached across the table, taking her hand. That won't happen. How do you know? Because you're here. In Paris. Having dinner with a workaholic billionaire who's probably going to mess this up somehow, but you're giving him a chance anyway. He squeezed her fingers. You're brave enough to take risks. That means you won't end up alone. What about you? Julia asked softly. What's your biggest fear? Kenneth had never said it out loud. Not to his therapist after the divorce. Not to Preston, his business partner and closest friend. Not to anyone. That I'm incapable of putting anything before my work. That my ex-wife was right, I'm married to my company and there's no room for anything else. He met Julia's eyes. That I'll meet someone incredible and I'll screw it up because I don't know how to be present. How to choose a person over a deal. You're here now, Julia pointed out. In Paris. Having dinner with me instead of working on your European expansion. I rescheduled 2 calls to be here. Exactly. You rescheduled. That's choosing. She turned their hands over, lacing their fingers together. Maybe you're more capable than you think. The waiter brought dessert, chocolate soufflé that melted on their tongues. Paris sparkled below them, a million lights in the darkness. Julia, Kenneth said. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for 5 days. But I need you to know, this isn't just some vacation romance for me. You're not just some woman I met on a plane. What am I then? He searched for the right words. You're the reason I'm glad my meeting got scheduled in Paris. You're the reason I'm actually seeing the city instead of just hotel conference rooms. You're the reason I haven't checked my email in 3 hours, which might be a personal record. Julia laughed, but her eyes were bright. Kenneth, I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for honesty. Is this real for you too? Or am I alone in feeling like everything changed when you sat down next to me on that plane? For a long moment, Julia just looked at him. Kenneth's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than waiting for her answer. Then Julia stood up, walked around the table, and kissed him. Not their first kiss, that would come later, officially on June 12th. But this was the first moment Kenneth knew, absolutely knew, that Julia Garrett felt exactly what he felt. When she pulled back, breathless, she whispered, "It's real. For me too." Kenneth paid the check faster than he'd ever paid anything in his life. They rode the elevator down in silence, hands clasped, both of them vibrating with anticipation. Outside, Paris was warm and alive with people celebrating the June evening. "Walk with me?" Kenneth asked. They sent Pierre away and wandered through the streets near the tower. Found a quiet spot along the Seine where they could see the Eiffel Tower sparkle. It lit up on the hour, thousands of lights dancing across the iron structure. Julia leaned against Kenneth's chest, his arms around her waist, and they watched the light show in silence. "Thank you," she said finally. "For tonight. For all of this. Thank you for saying yes." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Kenneth, I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of how fast this is happening. Of how much I already care. Of what happens when we both go home and real life starts again." "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But Julia, I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." She kissed him again, slower this time. Deeper. Kenneth's hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, and for a few perfect minutes, there was nothing in the world except Julia and Paris and the certainty that this, whatever this was, mattered. When they finally made it back to her hotel, much later, after more kissing and wandering and talking, Julia paused at the entrance. I'm not inviting you up, she said. I know. Not because I don't want to, but because when that happens, I want to be sure. About us. About this. Kenneth brushed a curl from her face. I can wait. Yeah? For you? I'd wait forever. Julia smiled. Let's hope it doesn't take that long. She disappeared inside, and Kenneth walked back to his own hotel with his hands in his pockets, grinning like an idiot. June 8, 2024. Kenneth B. Lee, 37 years old and supposedly too cynical for romance, was falling in love in Paris. And for the first time in 5 years since his divorce, he wasn't afraid of it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. June 12, 2024. 1 week since landing in Paris, and Julia had forgotten what her life was like before Kenneth. They'd settled into a rhythm that felt both brand new and completely natural. Work during the day, Julia buried in contract negotiations, Kenneth managing his European expansion deal. But every evening belonged to them. Tonight, Kenneth had promised her something special. Something, he'd said with a mysterious smile, that wasn't on any tourist map. Julia met him at 6, dressed casually this time, jeans, a soft pink blouse, comfortable shoes. She'd learned that Kenneth's idea of special often involved a lot of walking. Ready for an adventure? He asked, taking her hand. With you? Always. They took the metro. Kenneth insisted on experiencing Paris like locals, not tourists, to a neighborhood Julia had never heard of. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with trees and small shops. Where are we? She asked. Belleville. It's where artists and musicians live. The real Paris, not the postcard version. He led her through streets that smelled like fresh bread and flowers, past cafes where old men played chess and young couples shared wine. Up a hill, climbing stairs that made Julia's legs burn, until suddenly they emerged into a park. But it wasn't the park that made Julia gasp. It was the view. All of Paris spread out below them, the Eiffel Tower, Sacré-Cœur, the curve of the Seine. The city glowing in the late afternoon sun. Kenneth, she breathed. This is? Best view in Paris. No tourists know about it. He pulled a bag from his backpack. And we're having a picnic. He brought everything. Cheese and bread from a local fromagerie. Fresh strawberries. Wine in actual glasses, not plastic cups. A blanket to sit on. They settled on the grass, watching Paris turn gold as the sun set. Around them, locals did the same, couples and families and friends, everyone there for the view and the warm evening. How did you find this place? Julia asked, accepting a glass of wine. Preston told me about it. He said tourists spend all their time at the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, but if you really want to understand Paris, you come here. Kenneth stretched out on the blanket, propping himself on one elbow. Thought you'd appreciate it more than another fancy restaurant. I love it. Julia took a sip of wine. Thank you for sharing it with me. They ate and talked as the sky changed colors, gold to pink to deep purple. Julia told Kenneth about her childhood in Atlanta, about her dad teaching her to read, about her mom Nadine who still called every day to check on her. Kenneth told her about growing up in Seattle, about parents who built their own business and lost it in the 2008 recession when he was 21. About learning that success was fragile and you had to fight for everything. Is that why you work so hard? Julia asked. Because you saw what loss looked like? Probably. Kenneth was quiet for a moment. My parents never recovered financially. They're comfortable now, I made sure of that, but they lost something beyond money. Confidence, maybe. The belief that hard work was enough. He met her eyes. I promised myself I'd build something that couldn't be taken away. And did you? Yeah. But I'm starting to realize that financial security isn't the same as happiness. Julia lay back on the blanket, looking up at the darkening sky. So what makes you happy, Kenneth B. Lee? He lay down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Honestly? I'm still figuring that out. But being here, right now, with you, this is the closest I've felt in years. Julia turned her head to look at him. His profile was strong against the sunset. She could see the stubble on his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes from too many late nights working. She could also see something else. Vulnerability. Hope. The same things she felt. Kenneth, she said softly. Kiss me. He rolled toward her, propping himself above her on one elbow. Right here? In front of everyone. Right here. Right now. Kenneth smiled and leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both gentle and intense. Julia's hands found their way into his hair, finally, after wanting to do that for days, and he made a sound low in his throat that sent heat through her entire body. The kiss deepened. Paris disappeared. There was nothing but Kenneth's mouth on hers, his hand cupping her face, the taste of wine and strawberries and possibility. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Kenneth rested his forehead against hers. "Julia Garrett," he whispered. "You're going to completely undo me." "Good," she whispered back. "You've been undoing me since the plane." They stayed until full dark, wrapped in the blanket together, watching the city lights come on like stars falling to earth. Julia had never felt so content. So perfectly, completely happy. "Can I ask you something?" Kenneth said eventually. "Anything." "What happens when we leave Paris? When you go back to Atlanta and I go back to Seattle?" The question Julia had been avoiding. The reality she didn't want to face. "I don't know," she admitted. "Long distance is hard. We both have demanding careers. Seattle and Atlanta aren't exactly close." "No, they're not." "Are you asking if I think we can make this work?" Kenneth sat up, pulling her with him so she was tucked against his side. "I'm asking if you want to try. Because Julia, I haven't felt this way about anyone since my marriage ended 5 years ago. Maybe not even then. And I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I don't want to walk away just because it's difficult." Julia's heart was racing. They'd known each other for 9 days. This was crazy. But it also felt right. "I want to try," she said. "I don't know how it works. I don't know if we can figure out the distance and the schedules and all the logistics. But I want to try." Kenneth kissed her temple. "That's enough. We'll figure out the rest." They packed up the picnic and made their way back down the hill, hand in hand. The metro was crowded with people heading home from work, and Julia and Kenneth stood pressed together, swaying with the movement of the train. "Come to dinner at my hotel tomorrow," Kenneth said near her ear. "They have an incredible restaurant. We can eat on the terrace." "That sounds perfect." "And Julia? Bring an overnight bag." She pulled back to look at him, eyebrows raised. Kenneth's smile was slow and devastating. "I have a piano in my suite. I promised I'd play for you, remember?" "Just piano playing?" "Whatever you want. No pressure. But I'd like to wake up with you at least once while we're in Paris." Julia's answer was to kiss him again, right there on the crowded metro with Parisians pretending not to notice. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "I'll be there." June 12, 2024. Their official first kiss at sunset in a park overlooking Paris. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old and usually so careful with her heart, was falling completely and irrevocably in love. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was that she was pretty sure Kenneth was falling just as hard. Paris had given them each other. Now they just had to figure out how to keep this magic alive when real life started again. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, they had Paris. They had each other. And for now, that was everything. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next. Now let us continue. June 20th, 2024. 2.5 weeks in Paris, and something was wrong. Julia noticed it first on Wednesday. Kenneth had been distracted during dinner, checking his phone repeatedly. He'd apologized, said the European deal was hitting complications, promised to be more present. But Thursday was worse. He'd canceled their evening plans entirely. Emergency conference call that went until midnight. Friday, he'd barely texted. Now it was Saturday, and Julia sat alone in a cafe, staring at her phone and fighting the familiar feeling of being second priority. She'd been here before. With Devon, her ex-boyfriend who'd ended things in 2022 after Julia finally admitted she was tired of being the one who always adjusted her schedule, always understood when work came first, always came in second place. She'd promised herself never again. Julia said, "Can we talk?" "Need to see you." Kenneth said, "Meeting running long." "Tonight?" Julia said, "Kenneth, it's been 3 days." Kenneth said, "I know. I'm sorry. This deal is falling apart. I'll explain everything tonight." 8 p.m., my hotel? Julia wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him that work emergency was starting to sound like an excuse. But she also remembered what he'd told her that first night, his fear that he couldn't put anything before his company. Maybe he was right to be afraid. Julia said 8 p.m. "Don't be late." She spent the afternoon trying to focus on her own work. Her client's hotel acquisition was proceeding smoothly, contracts drafted, due diligence complete, closing scheduled for next week. Everything was going exactly as planned. Everything except her relationship. At 7:30, Julia dressed carefully. Not the romantic outfits she'd been wearing for their dates. Professional. A statement. She needed Kenneth to understand this conversation was serious. She arrived at his hotel at exactly 8 p.m. Kenneth was waiting in the lobby, and he looked terrible. Exhausted. Stressed. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. "Julia." He moved to kiss her, but she stepped back. Let's go somewhere we can talk. Something flickered across his face. Hurt. But he nodded. My sweet. They rode the elevator in silence. Julia's heart was pounding. She didn't want to do this. Didn't want to be the woman who issued ultimatums. But she also couldn't be the woman who disappeared into someone else's life again. Kenneth's suite was beautiful, spacious rooms with views of the Eiffel Tower, elegant furniture, a grand piano in the corner that he'd played for her the night she'd stayed over 2 weeks ago. That night felt like a lifetime ago now. Drink, Kenneth offered. No. I need you to be honest with me. He sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. I know I've been absent. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Kenneth. I need to understand what's happening. Because from where I'm sitting, this feels exactly like the relationship I walked away from 2 years ago. The one where I was always the understanding girlfriend who accepted that work came first. This is different. How? How is it different? Julia's voice rose. We're in Paris, supposed to be enjoying this time together, and I haven't really seen you in 3 days. 3 days, Kenneth. And before you say this is just one rough week, I need you to think about what happens when we go home. When work is your normal life and I'm the long-distance complication. Kenneth stood up, pacing. The European deal is collapsing. The data regulations they're demanding would essentially give them access to all our existing client information. I can't agree to that. It violates everything my company stands for. So walk away from the deal. I can't. We've invested millions in this expansion. Shareholders are expecting it. My board is counting on it. So choose, Kenneth. The deal or your principles. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Julia's hands were shaking. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're so caught up in what you're supposed to do, what's expected of you, what makes business sense, that you've forgotten to ask what you actually want. I want you. Kenneth shouted. Then quieter, God, Julia, I want you. But I also have responsibilities. People depending on me. A company I built from nothing. And where do I fit in that? Because right now, it feels like I'm the thing that gets sacrificed when the real life shows up. Kenneth crossed to her, taking her shoulders gently. That's not true. You're not a sacrifice. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 5 years. Maybe ever. Then prove it. Julia stepped back from his touch. Prove that I'm not just some vacation romance. That when things get hard, you don't disappear into work and forget I exist. How? Tell me how to prove it and I will. Julia's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. That's the problem, I don't know if you can. Your ex-wife left because of this same pattern. You warned me yourself that you didn't know how to choose a person over work. And I walked into this anyway because I thought. She shook her head. I thought maybe I was different. Maybe we were different. We are different. Are we? Because this feels pretty familiar. Kenneth sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. What do you want me to do? He finally asked, his voice rough. I can't just walk away from a multi-million-dollar deal because it's inconvenient. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to figure out what actually matters to you. And if the answer is your company and your shareholders and your reputation, that's okay. But I need to know now, before I fall any deeper. You think I'm not already in deep? Kenneth looked up, and his eyes were devastated. Julia, I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Their first I love you. The moment Julia had been waiting for, hoping for. And it was happening in the middle of a fight. Don't, she whispered. Don't say that now. Not like this. Why not? It's true. Kenneth stood, moving toward her. I love you. I've probably loved you since that first night when you told me about your father and books and turning pain into truth. And I'm terrified because you're right, I don't know how to balance this. My ex-wife was right. I put work first. Always. It's the only thing I know how to do. Then we don't work. Julia's voice broke. Because I can't be with someone who only has room for me when work allows it. I did that before. It almost destroyed me. So what are you saying? I'm saying I need space. I need to think. Julia grabbed her purse, heading for the door. And you need to figure out what you really want. Not what your board wants. Not what's good for business. What you want. Julia, wait. But she was already leaving, tears streaming down her face as she walked out of his suite, out of his hotel, into the Paris night that suddenly felt cold despite the June warmth. Her phone buzzed before she'd gone 2 blocks. Kenneth said, I know what I want. I want you. I'm just scared I'll screw it up. Julia said, then don't. Make different choices. Be different. Kenneth said, I don't know if I can. Julia said, then we have a problem. She turned off her phone and walked back to her hotel, crying on the metro while other passengers politely ignored her. June 20, 2024. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old and in love with a man who might not be capable of loving her back the way she needed, had just walked away from the best relationship of her life. And Kenneth B. Lee, 37 years old and finally understanding what his ex-wife had tried to tell him 5 years ago, sat alone in his suite and wondered if he just lost the only woman who'd ever made him want to be better. Paris didn't feel magical anymore. It felt like the place where everything fell apart. June 25, 2024. 5 days since the fight, and Kenneth was losing his mind. Julia wasn't answering his calls. His texts went unanswered. He'd gone to her hotel twice, but she refused to see him. And the worst part? He deserved it. Kenneth sat in another conference room with the European consortium, listening to them outline their latest demands, and all he could think about was Julia's face when she'd walked out. The tears. The disappointment. The way she'd looked at him like he was exactly the man she'd feared he was. Mr. Lee, the lead negotiator, a stern French woman named Madame Beaumont, was staring at him. Do you agree to these terms? Kenneth looked at the contract in front of him. Everything he'd worked toward for the past year. The European expansion that would make his company global. The deal his board expected him to close. All it required was compromising on data privacy standards. Giving the consortium access to existing client information. Minor violations of the principles his company was built on. Just business. Everyone did it. His phone buzzed. Preston calling from Seattle. Excuse me, Kenneth said. I need to take this. He stepped out of the conference room. Tell me you haven't signed anything yet, Preston said without preamble. Kenneth's business partner, 39 years old and born in 1985, had been with him since the beginning. They'd built the company together, made every major decision as a team. The deal's falling apart, Kenneth said. They want data access we can't give them. So walk away. The board. Screw the board. Kenneth, listen to me. I've been running numbers with the team. We don't need this deal. European expansion would be great, but we're profitable without it. Growing without it. The only reason to close is ego and ambition. Kenneth leaned against the wall. When did you become the voice of reason? When you went to Paris and fell in love with a woman who's apparently making you rethink your entire life. Preston paused. She's good for you, man. The difference in you these past few weeks, even stressed and miserable right now, you're more alive than you've been since the divorce. She won't talk to me. Because you're still choosing work over her. I haven't signed the deal. But you're still in the meetings. Still trying to make it work. Still putting this deal ahead of flying to her hotel and proving that she matters more. Preston's voice gentled. Kenneth, I've known you for 8 years. Since 2016 when we were nobody with a dream. And I've never seen you like this about anyone. If Julia's the one, stop screwing around with a deal that doesn't matter and go get her. Kenneth closed his eyes. What if she won't forgive me? Then at least you tried. But right now, you're proving her right. Work comes first. Everything else is secondary. The conference room door opened. Madame Beaumont looked out impatiently. Mr. Lee, we're waiting. Kenneth looked at her. At the conference room full of attorneys and executives. At the contract that represented everything he'd worked toward. Then he thought about Julia. Her laugh. Her intelligence. The way she'd looked at Paris like it was magic. The way she'd looked at him like he was worth believing in. And he made a choice. Madame Beaumont, I appreciate your time and consideration. But I can't accept these terms. They violate our company's core principles regarding client privacy and data protection. He extended his hand. I'm withdrawing from negotiations. Shock rippled through the room. Madame Beaumont's eyebrows rose. Mr. Lee, perhaps we can discuss. There's nothing to discuss. My answer is no. He walked out of the conference room, out of the building, into the Paris afternoon with his heart pounding. Preston, I just walked away from the deal. His partner whooped on the other end. Hell yes. Now go get your girl. Kenneth was already running. Julia's hotel was 20 minutes away. He made it in 12, arriving breathless and disheveled at the front desk. Julia Garrett's room, please. The desk clerk looked doubtful. I can call up, but... Tell her Kenneth's here. Tell her I walked away from the deal. Tell her I choose her. The clerk made the call. Had a quiet conversation. Hung up. I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Garrett says she's leaving Paris tomorrow and doesn't wish to see you. Kenneth's heart stopped. Tomorrow? She's not supposed to leave until next week. She changed her flight. Checking out in the morning. No, this couldn't be happening. Kenneth pulled out his phone, calling Julia's number. It went straight to voicemail. Julia, please. I know I screwed up. I know I was everything you were afraid I'd be. But I just walked away from the European deal. Walked away from millions of dollars and a year of work because none of it matters if I lose you. His voice cracked. I love you. I know I said it at the wrong time before, but I'm saying it again now. I love you. And I'm choosing you. Please don't leave Paris without seeing me. Please give me one more chance. He hung up and stared at his phone, willing it to ring. It didn't. Kenneth B. Lee, 37 years old and finally understanding that success meant nothing without someone to share it with, had made his choice. But he might have made it too late. June 26, 2024. Julia's flight left in 4 hours. She sat on her hotel bed, packed suitcase beside her, and tried to convince herself she was making the right decision. Going home early was smart. Professional. She'd finished her work, the hotel acquisition was complete, contract signed, client satisfied. There was no reason to stay in Paris. No reason except Kenneth. Her phone sat on the nightstand, Kenneth's voicemail playing on repeat in her mind. I walked away from the deal. I'm choosing you. I love you. Julia had listened to it 17 times. She'd also deleted it. Then recovered it from deleted messages. Then listened again. She was a mess. A knock on her door made her jump. She checked the peephole, half hoping, half dreading that it would be Kenneth. It wasn't. Hotel staff with her breakfast order, coffee and a croissant she wouldn't eat. Merci, she said, taking the tray. Alone again, Julia sat by the window, looking out at Paris in the morning light. She'd fallen in love with this city. The narrow streets, the cafe culture, the way the light turned everything golden. She'd fallen in love with Kenneth here too. And that was the problem. Her phone rang. Not Kenneth, Sienna, her best friend calling from Atlanta. Tell me you're not actually leaving today, Sienna said instead of hello. How did you know? Your ma called me. Said you changed your flight and sounded miserable. What happened? Julia's eyes filled with tears. I can't do this, Sienna. I can't be the woman who waits around while work comes first. I did that with Devin. I'm not doing it again. Is Kenneth like Devin? I don't know. Maybe. He says he's not, but you're scared, Sienna finished gently. Baby girl, I get it. Devin hurt you. Left you feeling like you weren't enough. But from what you've told me about Kenneth, he's not Devin. He canceled on me 3 days in a row. Disappeared into work exactly like I was afraid he would. And then what did he do? Julia was quiet. Julia, what did Kenneth do after you walked away? He walked away from a multimillion-dollar deal. Called me and left a message saying he chose me. And you're leaving anyway? It's too much, too fast. We've known each other less than a month. 3 weeks, Sienna. How can I trust what we feel in 3 weeks? How long did you date Devin? A year and a half. And at the end of that year and a half, did he ever choose you over work? Ever put you first? Julia closed her eyes. No. Kenneth's known you 3 weeks and already walked away from millions of dollars. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying this will be easy. But girl, you're running because you're scared, not because he's not worth it. What if he hurts me? What if he doesn't? What if you walk away from the best thing that ever happened to you because you're too afraid to take the risk? After they hung up, Julia sat in silence, Sienna's words echoing in her head. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The text reads, "This is Preston Caldwell, Kenneth's business partner. He gave me your number months ago in case of emergency. This qualifies. He's at the Pont de Arts. Has been there all night. Waiting for you. Please don't let my stubborn idiot best friend lose the only woman who's ever made him better." Julia's hands shook. The Pont de Arts. The bridge famous for love locks, where couples attached padlocks to symbolize their commitment. She checked the time. 2 hours until she needed to leave for the airport. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old and terrified of getting hurt again, had a choice to make. Stay safe. Get on the plane. Go back to her carefully constructed life in Atlanta where nobody could disappoint her because she never let anyone close enough to try. Or take the biggest risk of her life. Meanwhile, Kenneth sat on the Pont de Arts, exhausted and unshaven, watching the Seine flow past. He'd been there since midnight. 7 hours of sitting on a bridge, hoping Julia would somehow know he was there, hoping she'd come. Preston had texted an hour ago. I sent her a message. Now it's up to her. And you need to go home and sleep, man, asterisk asterisk. Kenneth had ignored him. The sun climbed higher. Tourists started appearing, taking photos, attaching locks to the bridge railing. Kenneth watched them with something like envy. Those couples looked so certain. So sure of their love. He was sure of his love for Julia. Just not sure she'd believe him. His phone rang. His mother calling from Seattle. Kenneth, honey. Preston called me. Said you're sitting on a bridge in Paris refusing to move. Preston needs to mind his own business. Preston cares about you. So do I. His mom, who'd taught him to work hard after watching his parents lose everything in 2008, was quiet for a moment. Your father and I, we worked ourselves to death trying to rebuild after we lost the business. Sacrificed everything. And you know what I realized when he had his heart attack 2 years ago? Kenneth tensed. His father's heart attack in 2022 had terrified all of them. What? That none of it mattered. The business, the money, the success we were chasing, none of it mattered compared to almost losing him. Her voice wavered. Kenneth, we raised you to value hard work. But we didn't mean for you to sacrifice everything else. If this woman makes you happy, fight for her. Don't make the same mistakes we did. I don't know if she'll forgive me. Then you better figure out how to prove you're worth forgiving. After his mother hung up, Kenneth stared at the locks covering the bridge railing. Thousands of them. Each one a promise, a hope, a declaration. He pulled out his phone and texted Julia one more time. Kenneth, I'm at the Pont d'Arts. I'll wait as long as it takes. If you get on that plane, I'll understand. But please, give me a chance to show you I meant what I said. I choose you. Always. He hit send and waited. Julia stood outside her hotel, suitcase in hand, the airport car waiting. The driver loaded her bag. Held the door open. Mademoiselle? Julia looked at her phone. Kenneth's text glowed on the screen. I'm at the Pont d'Arts. I'll wait as long as it takes. She thought about her father, who died 6 years ago in 2018 when she was only 28. His last words to her had been, "Don't let fear make you small, baby girl. Live big. Love big." She thought about her mother Nadine, 64 and alone, who still talked about Julia's father like he'd hung the moon. 38 years of marriage, she'd once told Julia. And I'd do it all again, even knowing I'd lose him. Because loving him was worth the pain. Julia thought about Sienna's question, what if he doesn't hurt you? What if you walk away from the best thing that ever happened to you? She looked at the driver. At the car that would take her to the airport. To safety. To her old life where she was in control and protected and alone. Then she looked at her suitcase. I'm sorry, she said to the driver. I need to cancel. I'm not leaving today. She grabbed her suitcase and started walking. The Pont d'Arts was a 20-minute walk. Julia made it in 15, practically running, her suitcase bouncing behind her on the cobblestones. She reached the bridge breathless and searching the crowd. And then she saw him. Kenneth sat on a bench, head in his hands, looking more exhausted and heartbroken than she'd ever seen anyone. His clothes were wrinkled. He needed a shave. He looked like he'd been there all night. He looked like a man who'd meant every word he said. Julia's suitcase clattered to the ground. Kenneth's head snapped up at the sound. Their eyes met across the bridge. For a moment, neither of them moved. Julia's heart was hammering. Kenneth looked afraid to believe she was real. Then he stood up, and Julia started running. She crashed into him so hard they both stumbled. Kenneth's arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair. You came, he breathed. God, Julia, you came. I almost didn't. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. I was in the car. I was leaving. What changed your mind? Julia pulled back just enough to look up at him. You've been here all night? Since midnight. I couldn't. I needed to do something. Show you I wasn't just saying words. Kenneth. Let me say this. Please. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm 37 years old. Divorced at 32 because I chose work over love. Built a billion-dollar company and felt empty every single day. And then I sat down next to you on a plane, and for the first time in 5 years, I wanted something more than success. I wanted you. Tears streamed down Julia's face. I'm going to mess up, Kenneth continued. I'm going to work too late sometimes. I'm going to get stressed about deals and forget to text. I'm going to be the person my ex-wife left because I'm still learning how to balance everything. But Julia, I swear to you, I will try. Every single day, I will choose you. I will put you first. And when I fail, because I will fail, I will own it and do better. I'm scared, Julia whispered. I know. So am I. But Julia Elizabeth Garrett, I love you. I love your intelligence and your strength and the way you read Toni Morrison on airplanes. I love that you call your ma every day and that you left a job that made you miserable to build something you believe in. I love that you made me want to be better than I thought I could be. Julia's hands fisted in his shirt. I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I love you so much it terrifies me. Kenneth kissed her then, desperate and relieved and full of promise. Julia kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, feeling his heart racing against hers. When they finally broke apart, Kenneth rested his forehead against hers. Don't get on that plane, he said. Stay in Paris. Stay with me. My flight? Change it. Stay the extra weeks you planned. Let me prove this is real. Julia nodded. Okay. Yes. I'll stay. Kenneth pulled her close again, and they stood on the Pont d'Arts surrounded by thousands of love locks and hundreds of tourists, holding each other like they'd never let go. June 26, 2024. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old, had almost lost the love of her life because she was too scared to trust. Kenneth B. Lee, 37 years old, had finally learned that some things were worth more than any business deal. Paris had brought them together. And Paris, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. June 28, 2024. 2 days since the bridge, and everything had changed. Julia had moved out of her hotel and into Kenneth's suite. Not just for convenience, though that was part of it, but because after almost losing each other, neither of them wanted to spend another night apart. They'd spent the past 48 hours mostly in bed, talking, making love, ordering room service, and talking some more. Healing the wounds from their fight. Building something stronger. Now they sat on Kenneth's terrace in the early evening, Paris spread out before them, sharing wine and cheese as the Eiffel Tower prepared for its evening light show. I talked to my board this morning, Kenneth said, his fingers interlaced with Julia's. Officially withdrew from the European expansion. Some of them were unhappy, but Preston backed me up. Showed them the numbers, we don't need it. How do you feel about it? Kenneth considered. Relieved, actually. That deal stopped being about smart business and became about ego. Proving I could do it. Proving I was successful enough. He squeezed her hand. But I already built something successful. What I needed to build was a life worth living. Julia leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm proud of you. Yeah? Yeah. That took courage. Walking away from something you worked toward for a year. You gave me courage. Kenneth kissed the top of her head. What about you? Your client's deal closed successfully. Any other projects waiting in Atlanta? A few. Nothing urgent. Julia was quiet for a moment. Actually, I've been thinking about something. Tell me. My consulting firm is doing well. I have good clients, steady work. But it's all US-based. I've been thinking about expanding internationally. She sat up to look at him. Maybe opening a European office. Someone needs to be here to handle the legal side of international acquisitions. Kenneth's eyes widened. Are you saying? I'm saying I could split my time. Atlanta and Paris. Or maybe Atlanta and London easier for EU work. I don't know exactly. But Kenneth, if we're going to make this work long-term, one of us needs to be flexible. And my business is more portable than yours. Julia, I can't ask you to uproot your life. You're not asking. I'm offering. She cupped his face. I've spent 3 years building a business in Atlanta. It's stable enough now that I can expand. And honestly, this trip showed me how much I've been limiting myself. There's a whole world out there. Why not build something global? Kenneth pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. You're incredible, he murmured against her lips. You know that? I'm practical. And in love. Those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They kissed slowly, deeply, until the Eiffel Tower lit up in its nightly display and tourists on nearby terraces applauded. Later, as they lay in bed with the windows open and Paris humming beyond, Kenneth traced patterns on Julia's bare shoulder. I want to take you somewhere tomorrow, he said. Somewhere special. More special than the Eiffel Tower restaurant? Than the secret park in Belleville? Different special. It's a surprise. I'm learning that your surprises are dangerous to my heart. Kenneth rolled over, propping himself above her. Good dangerous or bad dangerous? Julia pulled him down for a kiss. The best kind of dangerous. June 29, 2024. Kenneth rented a car, a sleek convertible that made Julia laugh, and they drove out of Paris into the countryside. Where are we going? Julia asked for the 10th time. You'll see. They drove through rolling hills covered in vineyards, past stone villages that looked unchanged for centuries. The day was perfect, warm sun, clear blue sky, the wind in Julia's hair as they sped along country roads. After 2 hours, Kenneth pulled into a small town called Giverny. This is where Monet lived, he explained as they parked. The painter. His house and gardens are here. They spent the afternoon wandering through gardens that looked like paintings come to life. Water lilies floating in green ponds. Weeping willows and Japanese bridges. Flowers in every color imaginable. Julia had never been particularly interested in art, but standing in Monet's gardens, she understood why people created beautiful things. To capture moments like this. To make joy permanent. My mom would love this, she said, taking photos to send to Nadine back in Atlanta. She used to garden before Dad died. Then she sort of gave up on it. Maybe you could bring her here someday, Kenneth suggested. I'd love to meet her. Julia looked up at him, surprised by the casualness of the statement. Like meeting her mother was a given, not a question. You want to meet my ma? Of course. Julia, I'm not interested in some casual thing that ends when we leave Paris. I want the real thing. Meeting parents. Navigating holidays. Figuring out whose city we spend weekends in. All of it. Julia's heart was too full for words. She just nodded and kissed him, right there in Monet's gardens with tourists streaming past. They had lunch at a small restaurant overlooking the gardens, sharing dishes and wine and dreams about the future. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Kenneth said. Julia thought about it. I want kids. Someday. Maybe two. I want to give them what my dad gave me, books and love and the belief that they can do anything. That sounds perfect. What about you? You said your ex-wife wanted kids. Kenneth nodded slowly. She did. I wasn't ready then. Too focused on building the company. But now. He met Julia's eyes. Now I think I'd like that too. Not right away. But someday. With the right person. The implication hung in the air between them. With you, his eyes said. With you, Julia's heart answered. Driving back to Paris as the sun set, Julia's phone rang. Her mother. Hey, Ma. I was just about to call you. Baby, I got your pictures. Those gardens are beautiful. Nadine paused. You sound happy. Really happy. It's been a long time since I heard you like this. Julia glanced at Kenneth, who was focused on the road but smiling. I am happy. Really happy. Is he there? This man you met? He's driving. Put me on speaker. I want to meet him. Julia laughed. Ma. Put me on speaker, Julia Elizabeth. Julia rolled her eyes but complied. Ma, this is Kenneth. Kenneth, my mother Nadine. Mrs. Garrett, Kenneth said smoothly. It's an honor. Don't Mrs. Garrett me, young man. My daughter's been in Paris 3 weeks and from what I can tell, you've turned her whole life upside down. I need to know your intentions. Ma. Julia wanted to die of embarrassment. But Kenneth was grinning. My intentions are to make your daughter happy, Mrs. Garrett. To support her dreams. To be worthy of the incredible woman she is. And if I'm very lucky, to convince her to build a life with me. Silence from the phone. Then, you heard her, I'll fly to wherever you are and make you regret it. I believe you. And if I ever hurt her, I'll deserve it. Nadine laughed. I like him, baby. He's got sense. After they hung up, Julia was shaking her head. I can't believe she interrogated you. I would have been disappointed if she didn't. She loves you. She's protecting you. What about your parents? Do I get to be interrogated by them too? Absolutely. They're going to love you. Kenneth reached over, taking her hand. Fair warning, my mom will try to feed you constantly and my dad will want to talk politics and history for hours. Sounds perfect. They drove back into Paris as the city lights came on, and Julia realized she'd stopped thinking about Atlanta as home. Home was starting to feel like wherever Kenneth was. June 29, 2024. They'd been together less than a month. It was crazy. Too fast. Completely illogical. And Julia had never been more certain of anything in her life. July 14, 2024. Bastille Day in Paris. Julia woke to an empty bed and a note on Kenneth's pillow, dress up. Something special tonight. I'll pick you up at 6. I love you. K****. She smiled, running her fingers over his handwriting. They'd been together just over a month now, 40 days since they'd met on the plane. 6 weeks that had changed everything. The past 2 weeks had been perfect. They'd fallen into a rhythm, working during the day, exploring Paris at night. Julia had started conversations with potential European clients about expanding her consulting practice. Kenneth had shifted his company's focus to strengthening existing markets instead of endless expansion. They'd video called their respective families. Julia had watched Kenneth charm her mother over FaceTime, promising to bring Julia home for a visit soon. Kenneth's parents had welcomed Julia warmly, his mother already planning a dinner in Seattle. Everything was falling into place. But tonight felt different. Special. Julia spent the day getting ready, enlisting the help of a hotel stylist. She chose a stunning emerald green gown that made her dark skin glow, styled her natural curls in an elegant updo, wore the diamond earrings her father had given her mother, now Julia's, for their 25th anniversary back in 2005. At exactly 6 p.m., Kenneth knocked on the suite door. When Julia opened it, his expression made every minute of preparation worth it. Julia. His voice was reverent. You're? I don't have words. He looked incredible too. Tuxedo perfectly tailored, hairstyled, a single white rose in his hand, their flower, from that first official date. Where are we going? Julia asked, accepting the rose. You'll see. But first. He pulled out a small box. Julia's heart stopped. Too small for a ring. She breathed again. Kenneth opened it to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a tiny Eiffel Tower encrusted with diamonds. "So you'll always remember Paris," he said softly, fastening it around her neck. "Where we found each other." Julia touched the pendant, her eyes misty. "Kenneth, it's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you." The car waiting downstairs was even more extravagant than Julia expected, a vintage Rolls-Royce, complete with driver in formal livery. "This is over-the-top billionaire nonsense again," Julia said, but she was smiling. "Just wait." They drove through Paris decorated for Bastille Day, French flags everywhere, crowds gathering for the evening fireworks. The energy was electric, celebratory. The car stopped near the Trocadero, the plaza across from the Eiffel Tower. "We're getting out here?" Julia asked. "We're having dinner here." Kenneth led her to the plaza, and Julia gasped. He'd arranged a private dinner on the Trocadero, a single table set with white linens, flowers, candles. A small string quartet playing softly. The Eiffel Tower as their backdrop, lit up in red, white, and blue for Bastille Day. Around them, barriers kept crowds at a distance, but Julia could hear people exclaiming, taking photos of the romantic setup. "Kenneth," she breathed. "This is too much?" "Perfect. It's absolutely perfect." Dinner was incredible, each course better than the last, wine flowing, the quartet playing romantic songs. But Julia could barely focus on the food. Kenneth was nervous, she realized. Actually nervous. She'd seen him negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. She'd watched him present to hostile board members with complete confidence. But tonight, he was nervous. "Kenneth," Julia said over dessert. "What's going on?" "What do you mean?" "You've been jittery all evening. Checked your watch 3 times. Are you okay?" He laughed, but it sounded shaky. "I'm fine. Just timing." "Timing for what?" Before he could answer, the Eiffel Tower's lights began to change. The normal lighting shifted, and suddenly, scrolling across the tower in lights, were words. "Julia, I love you." Julia's hands flew to her mouth. Around them, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. "Kenneth, oh my God." But Kenneth was standing, moving around the table. Getting down on one knee. Julia's breath stopped. Her heart stopped. Everything stopped. "Julia Elizabeth Garrett," Kenneth said, his voice carrying despite the noise around them. "I met you 41 days ago on a plane. I didn't believe in love at first sight until you sat down next to me and changed my entire world." Tears streamed down Julia's face. "You made me want to be better. You made me question everything I thought success meant. You showed me that building a life is more important than building an empire." He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, emerald cut, surrounded by smaller diamonds, elegant and perfect. "I know it's fast. I know we still have logistics to figure out, whose city, how we split time, all the practical details. But Julia, I'm sure of this. I'm sure of us. I'm sure that I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, supporting your dreams, and building something beautiful together." He took a breath. "Julia, will you marry me?" The Eiffel Tower sparkled behind him. The crowd held its breath. The quartet had stopped playing. Julia looked down at Kenneth, this man who'd walked away from millions of dollars for her, who'd waited on a bridge all night, who'd somehow found a way to put her name in lights on the Eiffel Tower, and she knew her answer. "Yes." Her voice came out as a whisper, then stronger. "Yes, Kenneth, yes." Kenneth slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her as the crowd erupted in cheers. Fireworks exploded overhead, the Bastille Day celebration beginning, lighting up the sky in brilliant colors. Julia kissed him back, tasting salt from both their tears, feeling his heart racing against hers, the ring heavy and perfect on her finger. When they finally broke apart, Kenneth rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "God, Julia, I love you so much. I love you too. Even though you're ridiculously over the top with your proposals." He laughed. "Had to make sure you'd remember it. Kenneth, I could never forget any of this. Any of you." They stayed for the fireworks show, wrapped in each other's arms, as Paris celebrated around them. The ring caught the light from the explosions overhead, and Julia kept looking at it, still not quite believing this was real. "When did you plan all this?" she asked. "The tower lights, the dinner, the plaza. Started planning the day after the bridge. I knew then I was going to marry you. Just had to wait for the right moment. Bastille Day? The day France celebrates freedom. Seemed fitting for the day I asked you to choose me forever." Julia kissed him again, slower this time, pouring everything she felt into it. Later, as they drove back through Paris streets filled with celebration, Julia called her mother. "Ma," she said when Nadine answered. "I have news. Please tell me that man proposed." Julia laughed. How did you know? Baby, I could hear it in his voice when we talked. That man was already planning the wedding. Nadine's voice went soft. Your daddy would be so happy for you. So proud. Julia's throat tightened. I wish he was here. He is, baby. He's watching. And he's smiling. They talked for another 20 minutes before Julia finally hung up and called Sienna, who screamed so loud Kenneth heard it from across the car. Back at the suite, champagne waiting and Paris glittering beyond the windows, Kenneth pulled Julia close. No regrets, he asked. Not a single one. You. My only regret is that I didn't sit in seat 2A on every flight for the past 5 years. Maybe I would have found you sooner. We found each other at exactly the right time. They made love slowly, reverently, as the sounds of Bastille Day celebration drifted through the open windows. Julia fell asleep with her hand on Kenneth's chest, the ring catching moonlight, feeling more at peace than she'd felt since her father died 6 years ago. July 14, 2024. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old, had gone to Paris for a business trip and gotten engaged to a billionaire on Bastille Day. Life was strange and beautiful and perfect. And they were just getting started. July 17, 2024. 3 days after the proposal, and Julia still couldn't stop staring at her ring. She was supposed to be packing. Her flight back to Atlanta, their flight, since Kenneth was coming with her, left tomorrow. But instead, she sat on the terrace of Kenneth's suite, watching Paris in the afternoon light and thinking about everything that had changed. Still having second thoughts? Kenneth appeared with 2 glasses of wine. Not even close. Julia accepted a glass. Just processing. 6 weeks ago, I boarded a plane to Paris for a business trip. Now I'm going home engaged to a man I met on that plane. It's surreal. Kenneth sat beside her, pulling her feet into his lap. Good surreal or bad surreal? The best surreal. Julia wiggled her toes, and he laughed, tickling her feet. Stop. I'm being romantic. You're being adorable. He settled her feet back in his lap, his hands warm on her ankles. Nervous about going home? Meeting everyone in person instead of over video? Julia considered. A little. Your parents seem wonderful, but meeting them as your fiancé is different than a casual video chat. They already love you. My mom called yesterday just to tell me not to screw this up. Smart woman. She also asked when we're planning the wedding. Julia nearly choked on her wine. We got engaged 3 days ago. I know. I told her we'd figure it out. But, Kenneth's fingers traced patterns on her calf. I've been thinking about it. What do you want? Big wedding? Small? Church? Beach? Julia set down her wine glass. Honestly? I don't need big. I just need real. My family, your family, our closest friends. Somewhere that matters to us. Like Paris? Maybe. Julia smiled. Or maybe Atlanta, so my ma doesn't have to travel. Or Seattle for your family. Or we could do something in between, maybe Charleston or Savannah. Somewhere beautiful and romantic. Whatever you want, we'll make happen. Kenneth pulled her fully into his lap. Although fair warning, my company's headquarters is in Seattle. Most of my board meetings, the main office, key staff, it's all there. And my consulting business is based in Atlanta, Julia said. So we have a geography problem to solve. What if we didn't have to choose? What do you mean? Kenneth's eyes lit up with excitement. You said you were thinking about expanding to Europe. What if we kept a place in Paris? And I've been talking with Preston about opening a satellite office in Atlanta. There's a growing tech scene there, it makes business sense. So we could have Seattle as home base, Atlanta as your office, and Paris as our escape. Julia stared at him. 3 cities? Kenneth, that's a lot, I know. But you're building an international consulting practice. I run a global tech company. Why limit ourselves to one place? He cupped her face. I'm not saying we live out of suitcases. I'm saying we build homes, plural. Places that are ours in the cities we need to be. That sounds expensive and complicated. I can afford expensive. And complicated is just logistics. Kenneth kissed her softly. Julia, I spent 5 years living in Seattle alone, working too much, going home to an empty house. I don't want that anymore. I want a life with you, wherever that takes us. Julia's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears. How did I get this lucky? I'm the lucky one. You could have ignored me on that plane. Could have refused dinner in Paris. Could have gotten on that flight home and never looked back. But you took a chance on me. Best decision I ever made. They kissed as the sun set over Paris, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. July 18, 2024. Their last morning in Paris. Julia woke early, slipping out of bed without waking Kenneth. She dressed quietly and walked through the streets one last time, wanting to memorize everything. The cafe where they'd had that first coffee. The restaurant in Saint-Germain where Kenneth had first said he was falling for her. The Pont d'Arts where she'd almost lost him and found him again. She stopped at a small shop and bought a love lock. Engraved it with their initials and the dates, K.L. plus JG, June 3, 2024, forever. Back at the bridge, she attached it to the railing among thousands of others, saying a silent thank you to Paris for giving her Kenneth. When she returned to the suite, Kenneth was awake and panicking. "Where were you? I woke up and you were gone." "Just saying goodbye to the city." Julia showed him a photo of the lock. "Making sure we're part of Paris forever." Kenneth pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you. Don't scare me like that." "Sorry. I love you too." They spent their last hours in Paris slowly. Room service breakfast on the terrace. Long shower together. Making love one more time with the windows open and the sounds of the city drifting in. At the airport, Julia looked back at the city skyline and felt a pang of sadness. "We'll come back," Kenneth promised, lacing his fingers through hers. "Every year. Paris will always be ours." The flight home was nothing like the flight to Paris. This time, they sat together, holding hands, making plans. Julia worked on her laptop, drafting emails to potential European clients. Kenneth reviewed contracts for the Atlanta satellite office. They were building their life together. Already. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Julia fell asleep with her head on Kenneth's shoulder, her ring catching the cabin light. Kenneth looked down at her, this incredible woman who'd changed everything, and silently thanked whatever force of the universe had put her in seat 2B on that flight to Paris. 6 months later, January 2025. The wedding took place on a Saturday in Charleston, South Carolina. January 25, 2025, exactly 7 months and 22 days after they'd met. 50 people gathered in a historic church near the waterfront, Julia's family from Atlanta, Kenneth's from Seattle, Preston as best man, Sienna as maid of honor, and the friends who'd supported them both. Julia wore white lace that made her skin glow. Kenneth wore a tuxedo and cried when she walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. "Your daddy would be so proud," Nadine whispered before giving Julia away. The vows were simple and from the heart. "Julia," Kenneth said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. "You taught me that success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in moments. Moments like this. I promise to choose you, every day, for the rest of our lives. I promise to build a life worthy of your love. And I promise that no matter where our work takes us, you will always be home." Julia took his hands. "Kenneth, you showed me that taking risks can lead to magic. That love doesn't have to fit a timeline or make logical sense. I promise to support your dreams while building my own. I promise to call you out when work takes over and to forgive you when it does. And I promise to love you, in Paris, in Atlanta, in Seattle, and everywhere in between." They exchanged rings, hers, the engagement ring from Bastille Day, his, a simple platinum band Julia had chosen. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Kenneth pulled Julia close and kissed her as their families cheered. The church bells rang, and rice flew as they ran down the aisle together, laughing. The reception was at a historic mansion overlooking the water. They danced their first dance to a jazz song that reminded them of that club in Montmartre. Cut a cake while Preston told embarrassing stories about Kenneth's failed attempts at French. Late in the evening, Julia and Kenneth slipped away to the waterfront, needing a moment alone. "Happy?" Kenneth asked, pulling her close despite the January chill. Deliriously. Julia rested her head on his chest. "You? I never thought I could be this happy. Never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything, Kenneth Lee." They stood watching the water, lights from the reception glowing behind them, and Julia thought about the journey that had brought them here. A business trip to Paris. A chance plane seat. A man who'd learned to choose love over work. A woman who'd learned to risk her heart again. "Ready to go back?" Kenneth asked eventually. "Dance with your husband some more?" "Husband," Julia repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "Wife," Kenneth countered. "I love the sound of that." They walked back to the reception hand in hand, ready to celebrate with their families, ready to start their life together. Kenneth B. Lee, 37 years old, had gone to Paris for a business deal and found everything he'd been missing. Julia E. Garrett, 34 years old, had boarded a plane expecting contracts and negotiations and gotten a love story instead. They had homes in 3 cities. Demanding careers. Complicated logistics. But they had each other. And that, they'd learned, was all they really needed. Paris had been the beginning. Charleston was the celebration. But forever was just getting started. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.